All right, welcome to another week of No Power Panel. I'm Noam.
And I'm Isaac.
We're recording a couple of days later than our usual time this week, Isaac, and I have to say that's probably a good thing because we would have recorded Thursday evening like usual, and then
Mhm.
I would have edited the episode and got it set to go up on Friday,
Yeah.
and the entire world situation would have changed in that period
Yeah.
of
Yeah, it's definitely it's things aren't looking good. That's for sure.
time.
It's
Yeah.
there's
So
yeah, go on.
yeah, I was just gonna say I have a little bit of housekeeping to take care of first, which is that I have to apologize to our any listeners who usually listen to us through one of the podcast feeds, because this week, earlier in the week, I went on to check analytics and realized that the episode from last week had never actually gone live on the podcast feeds. It had been posted but not published. I don't know whether it was an issue with me forgetting to click the button or with the system having an error and then me not checking back on it. But anyone who listens through the podcast feed got last week's episode a couple of days late. And so I do apologize for that. Good reason to check out our YouTube. We're always on time with YouTube.
And I'm sure all of our takes were relevant a few days later, and people love listening to stuff that's out of date.
Exactly. Exactly. So, regardless, if you're listening, please like, comment, subscribe. Let us know you're there. What you think, whether you agree or disagree. Um, we're always interested to hear feedback. Um, all right, Isaac, did World War III start this week?
um, I don't think so. Hopefully, I try to be optimistic with these things, but it's not looking good. I feel like Israel is extremely emboldened by none of its allies holding it to account, realizing what they can get away with, and essentially uh, feels like they have carte blanche to do whatever the hell they want in the region without any consequence, which I feel like is extremely concerning and I think is just um, I my it's just to me it's just at this point it's just sad. I feel like there's no way this ends well, you know? It's just continued
Yeah,
escalation and attacks on um like unprovoked attacks on, you know, other nations and I don't know I don't have nuanced I don't have any words for it. It's still just kind of like shocking, but well, it's not shocking because
mhm,
we've come to expect it, but it's just sad, but yeah.
yeah. No,
And
that's.
they're
I think
putting
that that's.
yeah. Yeah. They're just putting civilians in danger in all cases, including their own civilians.
Mhm.
And it's like the it's freakish. It's freakish. I don't know what else to say.
Absolutely. No, 100%. I mean, my take for years at this point, but particularly since October 7th, um has just been like civilians shouldn't be targets of war. Like, I don't think that that should be a complicated take to have. I get that, like, that's, I guess, the way war has evolved at this point. That's the way Israel seems to want it. That's the way Iran seems to be responding. Like, I just fundamentally, we've seen all of this before. We've done all of this before,
Mhm.
and nobody seems to want to learn the lessons. The world leaders don't seem to want to take to heart the laws that past generations of world leaders imposed upon all of us around what is appropriate actions to take in a time of war.
Yeah.
And I think that we're in a situation right now where nobody seems to be behaving as responsible adults, and that is horrifying, and it's leading to the kinds of deaths that we're seeing, and the kinds of fear that I think we're all living with to whatever extent right now. And I think that we should be at a point where, we've talked in past episodes in terms of the way that kind of society's advance has allowed businesses to operate and has allowed governments to operate in terms of just economic drivers. I think, and where potential could be for changes in those kinds of things and more social policy in terms of humanity policy, in terms of those kinds of things. And I think that there should be no question that we should be asking the same kinds of things when it comes to matters of war and peace.
Yeah.
Right? Society has progressed to the point that we should be able to say, look, we're now at the point where targeting systems can do phenomenal things.
Yeah.
So why are we carpet bombing apartment complexes?
Yeah. And why is the media like, so the interesting thing to me is like, when I was first learning about the news on Thursday night, I was reading articles, and it's like just the articles in a lot of Western mainstream media are just parroting the Israeli, like the IDF's talking points and the foreign ministries for Israel's talking points, and just saying Israel carried out an operation where it, destroyed nuclear bases and targeted high-ranking officials in the Iranian military. And then it's like, then you're seeing pictures in the same articles of residential apartment complexes being blown up. And, I'm having friends tell me that, their parents in Iran, uh, apartment complexes a few blocks away from them were blown up, and they woke up to this bombing. It's like, how can you, in good conscience, report in such a um, biased way to not even like deliver the reality on the ground that has happened? And then you end up with statements from the prime minister where I'm just gonna read it if that's okay.
Yeah, go for it.
It's like you're living in like a land of like uh like non-reality, because he says, okay, Iran's nuclear program has long been a cause of grave concern, and its missile attacks across Israel threaten regional peace. Which, by the way, these missile attacks came the day after, the attacks by Israel. There's no mention of that. Today, I convened our National Security Council to receive an update on the situation and to ensure that all necessary steps will be taken to protect our nationals and our diplomatic missions in the region. Canada reaffirms Israel's right to defend itself and ensure its security. We call on all parties to exercise maximum restraint and move towards a diplomatic resolution. There were steps being taken to a diplomatic resolution. They were supposed to have talks this very weekend for a diplomatic resolution. Israel then killed one of the negotiators. Like, how can you then be making these statements? Like, listen, like, the Iranian regime, like, is not like a peaceful regime. That's fine, but neither is the Israeli regime. Like, so to have some talk, like to make statements such as this is very, it's like it's very dangerous, I think. And you can't even, it shows a lack of humanity, I think.
Okay, I think that the thing about what Carney said is that it really does show where his allegiances lie in kind of the world order right now, um, and where he wants Canada to be put, and also just it was frustrating that he bought into the narrative that has been sold. His talking about Iran's attacks and Israel's right to defend itself is quite. I mean, it. I don't know that I expected anything different from him, given everything he said on the Middle East up until this point. But I hoped for more nuance from him. He is a leader who, in other areas, is able to uh, deal with a nuanced situation. We'll talk about the G7 in a couple of minutes, but the inviting of Modi to the G7, for instance, is an area where he has proven that he's able to take a nuanced position and understand a need to deal with all sides of an issue to find a resolution. But for whatever reason, and I think the likelihood is the large influence on politics that even in Canada the Zionist state has is makes a number of liberal held ridings very vulnerable in some instances. And so I think that there's a fear there to embrace a more humanist worldview in the way that I think he has on other issues. And I wish that that wasn't the case. I think that it opens up the possibility for Canada to be drawn into this. Um, and that is something that I think we don't want to see. It's something that past liberal prime ministers, I think, would have been able to avoid
Mm.
in a way that he doesn't seem like that interested in doing so. I think back to the time of Jean Chrétien with the Iraq War and his real stand up to American imperialism at that time. And Mark Carney seems more eager to capitulate in as many areas as possible so that he can try and secure a deal with Donald Trump that on some of the economic issues can be presented as a win for him.
Yeah.
And I think that that's where a lot of this comes from.
Yeah, totally. I was about to say the exact same thing. So I don't really have much to add. I think it's strategic communications, and it makes me sad because I think from a human perspective, you should be acknowledging like that, like, and saying you want to do everything possible to not allow this to escalate. And the way you would do that would be to harm Israel's ability to escalate it. Like
Mhm.
Israel has is much stronger, like, than Iran. Iran is not as competent. They have power domestically, and they have a lot of power over their citizens. And I don't want to obviously minimize like that the regime has been dangerous and dangerous to its own citizens. That is like
Mhm.
that's fine. But at a like military power situation, they weren't in a position to escalate things with Israel. So this provocation from Israel is what is escalating the situation, and it
Yeah.
must be condemned in the highest possible terms to not allow it to escalate, and they must be punished politically and economically for escalating because there's no reason for it. And it they need to feel like they can't make those decisions, which they
Absolutely.
have been in a position to feel like in the past, but now they're emboldened because no one spoke up about Gaza, uh, and no one actually harmed them. When no one, I don't mean like the people. I mean like Israel's allies who are supporting them economically and with arms and with all support politically. So because they didn't feel any pushback from that, I think um, the they're very emboldened right now, and I think that's dangerous. And I
Absolutely.
don't know how much more I can say on the topic, but those are
No, it's we continue to watch what's happening. It's hard to know where this is going to go. Um, we've seen these kinds of flurries in the past peter out after a little bit. And we've also seen examples in history of how this escalates. And we'll have to keep watching. This won't be the last conversation I expect we'll have about this on the podcast. Um, but I think for now, that's where we should kind of leave off. We'll watch as what happens, and we'll go from there. As a world and a planet and a human race, and I think that that's the last thing that I'll say is just like, let's remember humanity. Let's remember our shared humanity. Everyone involved in this situation is a human being. And there are evil people and there are good people and there are civilians who are just trying to live their lives. And I go back to where we started, which is just civilians should not be targets of war. Period. Full stop.
And I think if you say anything different, you've lost the plot.
Exactly. If you have been so brainwashed by one side that you are accepting civilian casualty as a good thing, then you have forgotten what this needs to be about, which is just, let's be human beings. Let's be fucking human beings to each other. Okay. Speaking of, this is a heavy week. We're in it now. This is a heavy week on a number of fronts. Our next topic is also a heavy one. We are witnessing fascism to our south. I think that, we've said it before. I think that we have no need to couch it anymore. This is what a fascist takeover of a state looks like. There are now effectively military police in the streets arresting civilians, which is a breach of the Posse Comitatus Act. So it is illegal in addition to being immoral. We saw this week a United States senator thrown to the ground, dragged out of a room where he was trying to do legitimate oversight as a part of his constitutional duties, and had handcuffs put on him. We have seen the ICE Gestapo show up at high school graduations, at elementary school graduations, and drag parents away. We have seen them see brown people driving in a van who are all in this country legally, and they have been detained and effectively kidnapped. That's what this is. And while we are seeing that, we are seeing a mass mobilization of people rising up against it. Mm-hmm. And I think that there is hope in that. Los Angeles in the last week has proven that it is possible to stand up. It is possible to have your voices heard. I think we've seen the Democratic leaders be stronger in the last week than we've seen for the last number of months. I think we all wish it had started earlier. But we've watched Gavin Newsom say some really important big things. We watched, that start to happen. Where are you on everything happening to the south of us right now, Isaac?
I think it's it's the escalation we all expected to see, in the first term. And I think of Trump's presidency, and I think it's coming to the conclusion everyone could predict it. You look at Stephen Miller, you look at other people in the Trump administration using pure white nationalist language, and these are senior officials, well, and the president himself. And this is the ends. Well, it's not the ends because it hasn't. I don't think this is the end. I think it's going to keep escalating. But this is the progression that was warned about, and I think they tried to take these types of actions in the first. People like Stephen Miller tried to take these types of actions in the first administration, like with the Muslim ban. And what happened is there was the people in the administration, there were mass protests at airports, and the people in the administration felt the pressure, and they felt politically pressure, and they felt like that this wasn't, they couldn't push it as far as they might have wanted to because there was political pressure for them not to. And I think after January 6th, and basically being able to have the entire base of support deny elections and erode democracy, um, and the culling over time of any voice around this president that might, you know, be not sympathetic, but like be not want to go down this kind of fascist road, has kind of cleared out. And I think the people still in the administration feel emboldened that the politics doesn't really matter to them. Like at this point, they can deny election results, they can rig election results. And I think they have just been able to get away with this like escalation of using ICE in this way. There was a huge protest about the idea of like separating families at the border when it first happened. This idea of you were taking kids away from their parents. Now they're straight up taking minors, tackling them to the ground, arresting them, and putting them in vans who are just walking down the street, and putting them into detention centers. And it's like this level that we've reached is so far past what the like discourse had been at, like the level of discourse, that I think people are struggling to catch up to it, in opposition. But I think that's finally starting to happen, and you're seeing people across the political spectrum and people who are apolitical finally raising voices. This is a turning point, I think, in terms of the opposition to this administration. But I think that also makes it scary, because I think they're going to try to clamp down on that as hard as possible, because I do think there is like even people who might have labeled themselves apolitical, uh, big figures are now starting to speak up, and the tide might be turning on acceptance of it, that it got to this point. But I think the response will be push back harder, keep the clamp down, put people into fear. And I feel like that's what always happens. Make people fear that if they speak out, they're in danger now too. You're now enemies of the state. You're now insurrectionists, if you say anything against the government. And I feel like that will just lead. I feel like that's where this is all heading. And so it's very scary, because that's, I think, the only way they can react at this point, from their perspective.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, we learned this week that Hassan Piker is now under FBI investigation. Popular left-wing streamer. They are starting to target people for political speech. And that is I think that there are a lot of people for whom that is the dividing line. I think that there are a lot of kind of like normies who may have voted for this administration to fix grocery prices and deport the bad guys, and who are accepting kind of parts of what they're seeing in from this administration. But as soon as you kind of start going after American citizens in the way that we're seeing, and as soon as you start going after political dissonance, there are a lot of people who I think wake up at that point and go, this is not normal politics anymore. This is no longer, I think, what a lot of people thought it was, which is, heightened rhetoric. The Republicans call the Democrats socialists and communists, and the Democrats call the Republican fascists. And that's just a par for the course. I think that there are a lot of people who are now looking around going, oh, wait, no. This looks like a lot like what I saw in history class. Mm-hmm. And that has the potential to, like you said, turn the tide. Today is supposed to be the biggest mass mobilization of people. I think they're trying to make it the biggest in American history for peaceful protest. No King's Day. We'll see by the time this episode is up. A lot of those protests will be live and happening, and we'll see what that looks like and how that goes on. Today is also the day where Trump is having his birthday party.
Yeah, his military parade birthday party. And the protests in Washington are expected to be some of the biggest that will be going on at the same time. The administration has claimed they support peaceful protests, and we've seen how they've labeled peaceful protests in the past as non-peaceful. So I think this will be a test to see how far they will go. What will they accept and what will they not accept and try to spin in any way that they can. So
I think what happens today will, in large part, set the tone for what happens for the next little while, right? I think that if today goes relatively smoothly, and by that I mean, like, you have the protests mostly happen, you don't have anything dramatic go down, you have kind of what you would expect from a normal day of large protests around the country, then we might be in for that kind of thing going forward, and for kind of what we've seen up to this point. I think that if there is a proverbial Tiananmen Square moment where, you have the famous picture at Tiananmen Square of the solitary protester standing in front of the tank, and that kind of symbolized and allowed that movement in China to grow and to catalyze into international attention and all of that. The potential for that happening exists today, especially in DC, but not just in DC. I mean, you've had sheriffs in Florida come out and say, if people are going to, throw bricks or whatever, and of course, like, nobody should be violently protesting at this point. But if that's going to happen, then we're going to tell their families where to pick up their bodies. The implication being that they are going to open fire on protesters if that happens is stunning, and I think would very, very quickly transition this. I think that there's also the factor in this, which is America's gun laws and how quickly this is a powder keg that if things start turning in the other direction, how quickly is this another civil war? And I don't think I'm exaggerating in asking that question. Um, I think that there are people right now who are bubbling. There's in I've been seeing groups on social media who are now training for armed resistance. Um, brown and black people in particular. Um, that kind of thing has gone on in the past. You've had the Black Panther Party, you've had some of those things, but we are seeing it be ramped up now as well. And I my concern is what happens if some idiot sheriff or idiot National Guardsman decides to point their gun at a protester, the way that we have seen them point their guns at media people this week and fire
Yeah,
rubber
and shoot
bullets.
rubber bullets at them.
Yeah,
Like not only point the gun, but you know,
fire.
fire deliberately targeting certain media.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
So that's where that is at. We will see what happens today. We'll be closely following. I'm gonna try and get this episode up as quickly as possible, so that what we're saying right now is still relatively relevant as we're saying it.
Mhm.
And stay safe, everyone. Protest. Exercise your right to protest. This is something that needs to be protested, and we stand with the protesters. But also be safe. Um, that is also important. You are also important. And the way that we will win is by having the upper hand morally.
Mhm.
And I think that that's important to be said at this moment.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. That's enough with some of that heaviest of stuff. Let's talk about the G7.
All right.
So the G7 is happening in Alberta this coming week. Um, and Mark Carney seems to want to make it a bit of a bigger event than the standard G7, Isaac.
Yeah, it seems like he kind of wants to have it be everything at once, strike a bunch of deals, be able to announce those deals, kind of having it as his like coming out party, saying I've arrived on the world stage. I can we can position Canada in a way. It's like we're hosting this summit of leaders, but I'm also gonna as you said, invite Modi. They've announced they've reached a deal on sharing intelligence, and so with India, which is a huge turn from when it seemed like India was a large adversary just like
Yeah.
a year ago with Trudeau and with the killing on Canadian soil and the claims that Trudeau made about the Modi government and how there was a lot of animosity in that relationship. So that's he was now saying they're sharing intelligence together with that government when it seemed like they had counterintelligence against each other, like as of very recently. Trudeau is announcing that they're gonna have individual talks with the UK to try to set out new trade agreements. Did I say Trudeau? Carney. Um, so like they're trying to, they're gonna have these talks, these group talks, and always at these summits, you do have individual leaders having separate meetings because it is a chance to have that FaceTime. But it seems like leading up to the G7, it definitely seems like Carney wants to announce as many of these like one-on-one bilateral negotiations. And then at the same time, I think what he really wants is to have good output from the US relationship and be able to announce something, if not at the G7, shortly after on new trade agreements with the G7. And I think it's all related to what you said earlier. This is their number one priority, I think, is being able to have good news about the relationship with the US. But the question is, what does Carney compromise that news? He ran on standing up for Canada and elbows up, and we're going to defend ourselves, which is a big rhetoric to take on. And the fact of the matter is, the relationship doesn't really support that. It's not a They're not on even ground. So Canada does kind of have to simp a little bit when it comes to that relationship, because America is much larger, has much stronger economy, a much stronger military, and just in every way kind of outmatches Canada. So it does lead to Canadian leaders kind of betraying, I think, what they might have for rhetoric domestically. What's your take?
Yeah, I think that that's right. I think that it's very much a power move, I think, on Mark Carney's part as well, to point out that, you have essentially the world powers coming to Canada right now for this meeting. The fact that he's also invited not just Modi, but he's invited Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese. Australia is not a part of the G7, but he'll be in attendance. You have him seemingly wanting to bring a lot of the world together to sort through some of the tensions that exist right now. I think is a part of his goal, is to have it look like Canada is kind of back at a leadership position for world relations, in the way that kind of has historically been a Canadian role that we seem to have backed away from in past decades. I think that Carney fundamentally is an internationalist, and foreign policy is, I think, his forte. It's where he wants to spend a significant amount of his time, is on fiscal and foreign policy, and social policy and things like that. He seems to be caring less about. Um, and this is his first major conference where he is not only in attendance as a participant, but he is the chair of, and he seems to be wanting to really hit the ground running with that. I'm not sure I would have invited somebody who was, the leader of a country that assassinated a Canadian citizen on Canadian soil. Um, I think that he's paying a domestic political price for having done that. There are some members of the Liberal caucus right now who are not happy. Some of the leaks coming out from the Liberal caucus about this are, people are foaming at the mouth mad that Modi has been invited, particularly after the news about Jagmeet Singh that has come out in the last 48 hours, which is that it's come out that the Indian government was surveilling Jagmeet Singh to the level that the status was essentially what it is, where the Canadian officials told Jagmeet and said, there's nothing we can really do about it. This is where it is, and that, now and that's all we can do is warn you. And that's horrifying, that a political leader in this country, who essentially, effectively from a policy perspective, was serving as a deputy prime minister for several years, was being surveilled by a foreign government whose leader has now been invited into the country consequence free. You know, I get what he's doing. I don't agree with it. And I think that he could be sending this same kind of message with Modi not present.
Yeah.
But I also understand that he's trying to put together some kind of coalition to strengthen his hand in these negotiations with Trump.
Yeah.
And that India has become a kind of key player for him in that. So
Yeah. It's it's a hard position to be in. We knew that. Um, there's still times where I think as a political leader you have to kind of take moral ground, even though it may not be for the best interest strategically. But at the same time, I think at this point in time you might need to have like a big tent approach in terms of like we just need to settle international tensions at all levels, and whatever it takes to do that, whatever's happened, I have to look past, because we need to not continue widening divides between countries, and as we've been
we
talking
started
with the
we
shared humanity.
we started this podcast today asking if we were in World War III.
Yeah.
Right? I think that when that is the place of the world, the state of the world, Winston Churchill did not like everything that Joseph Stalin did.
Mhm.
It's a you dance with the guy who brought you. And right now you deal with the state of the world as it is and with the players as they are. And India has a population of over 1 billion people. They control a huge amount of the world economy and the world population, and immigrants to the rest of the world come from India, and it's a major player that needs to be at the table. I'm just not sure that Modi needed to be at this particular table in Alberta this week. But,
Yeah.
Nothing we can do about it. We're the no power panel.
Yeah, exactly. So speaking of, do you want to move on to winners and losers?
Let's move on to winners and losers for the week. All right. Isaac, who's your loser this week?
It's kind of a cop out, but I guess I'll just say like humanity. I, I think civilians. I think there's no one wins from this kind of like rising world um animosity and tensions and attacks on civilians in on any front. The topics, obviously there's always shit going down in the world, every time period people are like, this is a historic or unprecedented time. Like I feel like if you look at like any decade at a certain point, but it's just like there seems like there's like an onslaught right now of uh rising strongmen kind of leaders, and they're all kind of like playing off each other and taking cues from each other, and I think it's regressive. I think for a while you could say, okay, leaders were the world in terms of uh like how leaders reacted to things was becoming more progressive, and I think there's kind of this like regressive action going on right now. So that's my loser. I have a real person for a winner. Okay, I'm
That's
not.
fair. No, I think that's I struggled with loser this week because I think that's the way it feels. Is just humanity has kind of lost its way, and we're watching that happen. My loser for the week is ICE.
they look incompetent. They look like whenever anybody is legitimately comparing you to the Gestapo, you're a loser. Like you're a loser from a PR perspective. You're a loser for what you're doing. You're a loser for these ICE agents. I don't know how they're living with themselves, doing what they're doing. There was a report this week that they took two parents from a van and left a 2-year-old and a 3-year-old sitting in this van on the side of the road. This is not normal. This is not what anyone should want to be doing with their time. This is criminal behavior, and the populace is very much waking up to this. I don't love violent protesting. I don't think it works as effectively as peaceful protesting. I'm about nonviolence and humanity, but at the same time, like when you go into a community and that community's response is to start putting bricks through your car windows, like en masse, you're doing something wrong. So I think that ICE has lost the plot. I don't think that they were ever an organization that needed to exist. I think that they have very much cemented themselves as something that the next Democratic president, assuming that there is a Democratic president ever again, it will need to get elected by pledging on day one an executive order shutting ICE down. I think that has immediately skyrocketed to what 2028 candidates will be running on the Democratic side. And so they're losers for what they're doing, and they're losers for the fact that like what they're doing is going to lead to their own death as an organization.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good loser. My winner for the week is Zoran Mamdani, who I think, mayoral candidate in the New York City Democratic primary, who is now polling very close, as we talked about a few weeks ago. He's even closer now, within a few digits of Andrew Cuomo, and who I think had the type of debate performance that people salivate over. He had a chance to land a blow on Cuomo in terms of eviscerating him and his record. Cuomo wanted to talk about his experience and record, and Mamdani it was like a rap, no, but he was like laying bars.
We're gonna end today's show by going back to an old favorite segment and playing it. I have it.
Okay, great. So I won't talk about it too much in terms of giving the description, but it is the type of speech that has launched him to national recognition. And I think no matter what happens in this primary, he is now a national figure. It happened with AOC when she won her primary against Joe Crowley. Was that his name? I just pulled that. Yeah, Joe Crowley.
Joe Crowley.
Okay, I don't know how I remembered that name, but when she won that primary, she launched herself to national relevance even before becoming a congresswoman. I don't think at this point Mamdani even needs to win this primary. He might not become mayor. Cuomo has a lot of backing from a lot of powerful people, and that speaks a lot in American politics. And he has a lot of name recognition, which speaks to a lot in municipal politics. Name recognition is absolutely paramount. So I don't know if he's going to win, but he has made himself a national figure, and most debates are largely inconsequential, but this speech, I believe, has given him a platform, and his comms team must be like blowing
salivating.
Yeah, exactly. Like you can't buy that type of media and earned media. So that's my
absolutely. Okay, so he was on my short list for this week, and then I went, I'm gonna save him for if he wins the primary.
Yeah, I know it's
But no, he definitely he
I think
deserves it this
have
week.
to
Is
win.
the
He
thing.
doesn't even have to win at this point. He now
No,
has
no, that speech. You're right. That speech was the moment that he needed to skyrocket him. If AOC runs for president instead in 28 instead of challenging Schumer, I think Mamdani has immediately cemented himself as that backup Schumer challenger replacement guy. He could run for governor.
or run for not even yeah.
Yeah,
Like like he now has a profile enough to at least get himself into Congress in
absolutely.
some way, shape, or form.
So we'll end our show today by watching that because I love that moment so much. My winner for the week is the protesters. Is the people of Los Angeles and the people participating in today's No Kings protest. They give me hope in this very, very dark time. Watching their humanity stand up, watching them stand up for what they know to be right, watching a community be invaded in the way that it was and push back and say, no, not in our town, not in our city. Having that happen, I think there's 5,000 protests planned for today across the country, somewhere akin to that in terms of numbers. So that means that in big cities, in small towns, and rural communities, people today are standing up and saying no, are saying when the fascists are at the gates, we have a moral responsibility to stand up and say no. When the fascist takeover is happening of a democracy, the people are the backstop. And they are taking that duty seriously. They are understanding what their role is in this time. And I give it up to them. When the world feels incredibly dark, they give me hope. So they're my winner for this week.
Well, it's good to end on hope. So yeah,
let's do that.
To Mr. Cuomo, I have never had to resign in disgrace. I have never cut Medicaid. I have never stolen hundreds of millions of dollars from the MTA. I have never hounded the 13 women who credibly accused me of sexual harassment. I have never sued for their gynecological records, and I have never done those things because I am not you, Mr. Cuomo. And furthermore, the name is Mamdani, Mamdani. You should learn how to say it because...
Well done, Zoran Mamdani.
So wild that I think it's so
like
wild. States have audience cheering, but go on. It adds.
No, it's true. But like that moment, what it did so brilliantly from a communications perspective, aside from just sounding really good and pointing out a bunch of Cuomo's flaws, is it completely discredited and disabled the key argument that is being made against Mamdani, right? Everyone who hears about Mamdani's policies supports him. It's that people are concerned about his experience compared to Cuomo's for whatever reason. And so what he was able to do with that speech was say, look, your experience doesn't count for shit because your experience is all of these things that are bad things.
Yeah, it's a negative. I might not have experience, but the only experience you have is a negative. So less experience is better than bad experience. So.
Exactly. He also had another key moment in the debate where Cuomo was saying that he hasn't done anything, which is a line Cuomo has used in past debates. And this time, Mamdani planted someone in the audience whose brother was a part of Mamdani's fight for cab drivers, and he said to Cuomo, "I want you to told this story and said, I want you to look at this man in the audience and tell him that that is nothing. And it completely took the wind out of Cuomo's sails around that argument. And it was a line that he did not use for the rest of the night. So it was a phenomenal performance, I agree. Ending on hope is good.
Yeah.
Everyone stay safe. If you're in the States and you're going out to protest, stay safe. We love you. We stand with you. We'll be back next week, and we'll see where the world is then. Bye.